The committee will come to order. After the ranking member and I make our opening remarks, committee members will have the opportunity to make 2-minute statements before we hear from today's distinguished panelists. That's distinguished except for Mr. Rooney of Florida. And without objection, members, including today's panelists, may have up to 5 days to insert statements into the record. And the Chair will recognize herself. We meet today as part of our continuing oversight of the United States' involvement in Libya to hear from our non-committee colleagues who have introduced legislation on war powers and on authorities relating to the use of force to address the situation in Libya. The committee will continue our efforts tomorrow morning at the House-wide members' briefing with legal experts. This briefing had to be, rescheduled from May 12th due to the avalanche of House floor votes. As we have reviewed before, the President commenced U.S. military operations inside Libya on March 19th and notified Congress within 48 hours, consistent with the War Powers Resolution. He announced operations limited in their nature, duration, and scope as part of an international effort, quote, to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe and address the threat posed to international peace and security by the crisis in Libya, end quote. The administration has claimed that congressional approval was not constitutionally required and that the use of force in Libya was constitutional because the President, quote, could reasonably determine that such use of force was in the national interest, end quote. An extremely broad claim of war-making power. Even some who regard the President's action as legal are concerned that the endorsement by the Arab League, the United Nations, and NATO seem to figure more prominently in his stated justifications than do clearly identified U.S. national security interests. Since the President's notification, NATO-led airstrikes in Libya have inflicted serious damage on Gaddafi's regime's war machine, yet loyalist troops continue to demonstrate cohesiveness and operational superiority over rebel forces. Last Friday, concurrent with the 60-day deadline under the War Powers Resolution, the President sent a new letter to Congress stating that the U.S. role in Libya operations, quote, has become more limited, end quote, and consists of, and I'm quoting here, non-kinetic support to the NATO-led operation, airstrikes in support of the no-fly zone, and since April 23rd, precision strikes by unmanned aerial vehicles. The President also expressed support for a bipartisan Senate resolution introduced Monday by Senators Kerry and McCain and 5 others. That measure expresses the sense of the Senate in support of, quote, the limited use of military force by the United States in Libya as part of the NATO mission, end quote, and calls on the President to submit to Congress a detailed description of U.S. policy objectives and plans in Libya. It is not a formal authorization for the use of force in Libya pursuant to the War Powers Resolution. The measures introduced by today's panelists would take a more Congress-centered approach to the Libya campaign. Mr. Rooney's resolution, House Concurrent Resolution 32, expresses the sense of Congress that the President should obtain statutory authorization for the use of force pursuant to the War Powers Resolution. The bill introduced by Mr. Amash would cut off, H.R. 1212, would cut off funding for the use of force in Libya until it is authorized by Congress. And Mr. Gibson's bill, H.R. 1609, would revise the text of the War Powers Resolution, replacing its current congressional procedures with a shorter provision tied more directly to Congress's power of the purse. Regardless of where one comes down on war powers issues and whether the administration requires express authority to continue its limited engagement in Libya, we can all agree that the administration must address certain critical questions that Congress and this committee have been asking for weeks. What are the specific goals and strategic endgame that our armed forces are pursuing in Libya? Are we willing to accept any role for Gaddafi in Libya's future? Who exactly are the armed rebels and the Transitional National Council? And what safeguards are in place to ensure that any U.S. assistance does not fall into the hands of those working against U.S. national security interests? 2 weeks ago, this committee favorably reported a resolution of inquiry seeking information from the Department of State. We will press for answers from the administration at the classified interagency briefing for members that we have scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I want to thank our panelists for making the time to be here today. I look forward to our discussion, and I'm now pleased to